All right, it's 6:36 and we'll call the meeting to order. Next, I guess we need to go to approve the agenda. Anybody need to look at anything, or is there a second for the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
All right, the agenda's approved. Jeff?
Second.
We got a second. Do we need to do it that way? Oh, okay, hand raise. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you, members of the board. Thank you, committee, for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about our statutory operating debt plan. The statutory operating debt plan was something we entered into a few years ago, and that is as a result of having a negative unassigned fund balance. Every year we have to update that plan, and so part of that update is tonight. And tonight we're bringing before you a plan to submit to the state of Minnesota for approval. And with this plan would allow our school district to continue moving forward. And so we're going to get the screen shared here. And we have a presentation for the community. Today with us is Business Manager Heine, who will be taking us through the presentation. We'll be doing this together. She has put extensive hours into this, working with our different teams on trying to determine how we can best move forward as a school district. There's been some celebrations as well as some challenges this year. And so we're going to walk you through that and get to our proposed plan. Business Manager Heine, I'll let you take it away. You're on mute right now.
Thank you.
The joys of this distance
Right.
stuff, right?
Let me start over. Just a little background on what statutory operating debt is and why we're here tonight approving this plan. Under Minnesota state statute, it's when a school district or charter school is reporting at the end of the year a negative unreserved general fund balance that exceeds 2.5% of its operating expenses. Some implications of the SOD. One is it's state requirement by state statute. So the timing, the rules, all that stuff is determined for the district. So there's not as much flexibility as you'd like in developing a plan. No assumptions can be put in there that are not going to already be approved in legislature or approved by voters. By the time that this plan comes out, it is the middle of December, and it needs to be approved by January 31st. And there's lots of work that goes into it. So there's little time for communication out to the community. And also this plan can create immediate and drastic action and changes. You're limited in what you can and can't do, or choices, or flexibility in that manner as well. And then there's also borrowing costs that we're incurring to pay back.
One thing that we really like to do is to gather input and feedback when we're making decisions. We have continuous improvement teams at each of our sites with teacher leaders and administration where they work through data to come to decisions on what evidence-based practices we should be using, what are some programming recommendations, and that's really important. We want that different input from different stakeholders. You're going to see that in our strategic planning process where we're looking for input from students, from staff, from parents, from community members. The challenge with SOD is it really limits our opportunities for those choices and flexibility. And the timeline is also very challenging, as Business Manager Heine said.
So our current, or the fiscal year 19 SOD plan, the one that we're currently under, because the other one, the proposed one that we'll be talking about has not been approved yet. But so the plan that was approved last year, this is where we were projected our unreserved fund balance to be by fiscal year. So as you can see, we were going to end fiscal year 20 at $1,081,000, and then in 23 still at negative $451,000 by the time we ended that 3-year plan.
So the whole point of the statutory operating debt plan is to work your way out of a plan they make us project multiple years out to show that not only are we making progress, but if you do get out, you're not going to go back into it. Looking out this far in advance, we would still be in statutory operating debt under the current statutory operating debt plan.
Also in that current plan that we're under, fiscal year 19, here are some of the reductions that were built in that plan. So fiscal year 22, so next year, we were going to do reductions of 4 FTEs and certified staff, 4 in the classified staff. We were going to switch to a 4-day school week. And also there was a hard freeze on all salaries across the board. And the same with fiscal year 23, the projections that were in the plan were a 4.0 certified staff, 4.0 in the classified staffs, and also again in this fiscal year, there was hard freeze on all salaries across the board.
A couple notes on there. In order to go to a 4-day school week, we have to get approval from the Minnesota Department of Education. So under the current statutory operating debt plan, that is something we would need to seek. The hard freeze on salaries, what that means and what was in the previous year plan was that there would be no salary increases, and that means no steps in lanes, meaning that you don't move a lane, you don't move in the years of experience, and there would be no new money put into that for those levels. So I mean, everybody stays, whatever they made this year is what they would make next year, and that's what's in the current plan that was approved last year.
So this is just a way to see it in graph form that kind of shows you where the fund balance, the unreserved general fund balance would be under that current plan, showing that top bar, the break even or the 0 level there was never achieved under that plan.
So even with cutting 8 certified staff, 8 of our classified staff, the 4-day school week, and no salary increases for anyone in the district, this is still what we'd look like under the current plan.
Some changes over the last 12 months. There's been both challenges and celebrations, as we've discussed. Some of the challenges we all know have been COVID-19, the state budget shortfalls, and the economic forecast for going forward and what that could look like. Some celebrations, we passed the levy. We had some budget efficiencies we were able to work through. And there was reorganizations and restructures to help move forward and right the ship. And there was new monies to help with COVID-19 expenditures that came from the federal government / state.
So on the challenge side, we know that COVID-19 has had a tremendous impact on schools and our economy. A year ago, they were projecting a pretty healthy surplus in our state budgets, and that has changed drastically. Initially, they were projecting a shortfall for this upcoming year that has now improved slightly, where they have a slight surplus that they're thinking in the forecast, but there's still, I believe, over $1 billion shortfall in the following state budget in the second year there of the biennium. In addition, we're also adding a lot of money into the economy through some of the different stimulus packages. And while that money is good, it also can have an impact on inflation. And so when we went through the levy process, we looked at a graph that went back to 2004, and we looked at the impacts of inflation and how per pupil funding and state funding had not even kept up with that in the past. And so we have to be cognizant of that challenge moving forward. But we have seen some new funding come in, and a huge thank you to the community for supporting us in the levy. Some of the different things we've worked on in the budget, and some of those new monies from those stimulus packages have gone to meet some of those extra costs with COVID, which we have had both in materials and in staffing.
So here's the results of our work and looking at the projected unreserved fund balance. So you can see that we're doing a comparison of the current or the fiscal year 19 SOD plan to the proposed fiscal year 20 SOD plan. In the previous plan, we were projected to have still a deficit of over $1 million both fiscal years. And as you can see with the budget efficiencies and the other items that we discussed on the previous slide, you can see that we ended fiscal year 20 with negative 580,400, and that's audited. And for fiscal year 21, we're projected to have a deficit spend of 219,881, which is still at the point where we're still in SOD, but vast improvements from the current SOD plan that we are in.
And I see there's a little thing there that should be 2.52%. I'm sure you saw that too.
Yes.
It's like there's a typo there. Apologize about that. This is really a cause for celebration, I think. We, in our current SOD plan, we're looking at a $1.2 million deficit at the end of this fiscal year, meaning June 30th of this year. We have now gone through the audit. We are now have a better idea of where we are. Remember, budgets are based on a lot of projections. We are going to be at negative 219,000. That $1.2 million, that is a very real number. And as we went through the levy process, we talked about that. And at that time, that was a very real number. It's only because, as we've said, budgets are living documents. Some of the work and efficiencies we've created over the last 6 months, we were able to go back into the previous fiscal year. We were able to do some different things. We were able to make some adjustments for this year. And so I think as a school district, we can be very excited that we have swung the budget roughly $1 million over the last 6 months, while also adding some staff, thanks to some dollars from COVID and whatnot, to help meet the social emotional learning needs of our students, as well as their academic needs. So I think that's a great point to celebrate, and just shows that when we talk to the community, they really wanted to see us getting some things right in-house. They wanted to say, take a look at what's going on, look at how you're doing things. We want to see some improvements. We'll help you out. We're going to give you the levy, but there's some things as a school district you need to improve upon. And I think that's evidence right here that our board, our staff, our administration have all been working in that direction. And thank you to Business Manager Heine for all of her work to help us get to this point.
So this graph gives you a picture of what, looking at fiscal year 22 budget with only adding the levy funds into it and continuing in the same path without making any changes or reductions, and what that could look like projecting it out in the future, with the only changes are your levy dollars built in. With that being said, you can see how we plateau, and if we're not careful, we can still go back the other way, and that's why we still have work to do to make sure that we get our budget where it needs to be.
Right. When we say that we needed the operating levy, that was very true. But the operating levy isn't enough. So yes, great, wonderful. We have new funding, and that is wonderful. But as you can see, even with our current model, by fiscal year 2024, we top out. And then we start to actually go back in the hole. And I think that is one of the big things that we have to be looking at, is we need fiscal sustainability. So just using the levy to say a problem solved is not enough. There are more things we need to do in order to right the ship and to make that work. Otherwise, we're going to be heading right back towards statutory operating debt. And obviously that's why MDE says you have to budget out X amount of years ahead of time to show that. So we took it out a little further. And the assumptions we built in here is we just carried forward. If we were to keep all of our expenses as they were, and if like contracts go up at the same rate in which they were, we keep the same staffing levels and do those things, that is how we projected those numbers out. So we used some previous numbers and just carried that forward.
So there's, as we discussed in the previous slide, we still need to right the ship. And how we're going to do that is we're still going to go through an operational budget assistance, or where our needs are, and where we want to go, and the long-term stability of our district.
We have more work to do. We've made great progress in the last 6 months, and we're moving in the right direction. But as you can see, just putting those levy dollars in place is not enough. And this is where that OBA comes in. As we work with the finance committee and we go through our budget, it's about right sizing. It's about looking at those comparable districts and how they're doing it. Where are we overspending and underspending to our comparables? In some areas, we're going to say we need to overspend here. We have a large area for transportation, right? We might have some higher transportation costs, but a dollar is a dollar. And if I have a dollar over here, I can't put a dollar over there. So that's got to come somewhere else. So how do we prioritize that? And the OBA will help us go through that process, take a look at that to right the ship, and really take our budget down and strip it apart to say, okay, if we didn't even have a levy, what would our budget look like? And then based on the strategic planning and our priorities, we say, all right, now let's layer in those levy dollars to do the things. Let's talk to the community. Let's talk to our staff. Let's talk to our parents. Let's talk to our students. And this is what we want that to look like. So when we do that, that's what's going to help us right the ship and maintain stability, both academically and meeting our students' needs, as well as the fiscal piece.
So in doing that, we also need to look what our fund balance priorities are. So in our policy that is approved, our fund balance is to be between 5 to 20% of our operating expenditures. So the fund balance that we are showing in the graphs, we want to make sure that's 5 to 20% of those expenses. The auditor's recommendation, as we kind of heard when they did the auditor's report at the last board meeting, they recommend between 8 to 12% or 1 to 2 bills of operating, or 1 to 2 months of bills based upon those operating expenses. So based upon the current plan that we're under, we're not meeting those needs.
The big reason why we have that range is we don't have, based on our budget, you know, we can slide around some percentage points up and down a little bit. But the auditor had said at our last meeting, 8 to 12%. At that 8%, we're just barely above where we don't need to borrow money. Because just like your bank account, certain types of the month, your account ebbs and flows. On the 1st, it always looks better, and the 12th, it doesn't look as good, and you might bop up the following week, depending on how you're paid. School districts are the same, so certain months of the year, we have less money in our bank account. And unless we have a fund balance, we have to borrow. And this year we borrowed $2.5 million in order to meet our payroll. When we borrow $2.5 million, we have to pay interest on that. So every year we are below that 8% range. We have to borrow money in order to meet our payroll. And that's money that could be used, invested in students. So it's important that we rebuild that. And the goal is not to have the biggest fund balance in the state of Minnesota. That is not the goal. The goal is to have enough to be financially stable so you can endure the ebbs and flows. You know, when you have a year where you get 0% from the state, you're still okay. The auditors said 1 to 2 months bills. At 12%, we're at about 1.6 months bills. We're not to 2 yet. So leaning a little bit more towards that 12 is probably where we want to be, because 8 is kind of like, we should be feeling a little uncomfortable at that point. So for fiscal year 22, we're proposing reductions again in the amount of $293,344. Now our OBA process is going to help us determine what those budget adjustments are and where we can create some efficiencies. And we think that there's places we can do that. Our finance committee will get a chance to start with some of that work at our upcoming finance meeting. This is part of righting the ship. As you saw in that levy, in that graph earlier, if we don't continue to make some of these adjustments, and if we don't find efficiencies, if we don't look at ways we can restructure positions, if we don't take a look at how we're currently running our academic programs and our staffing models, we are going to go right back to where we were. Now, we can have great programming, we can have amazing programming, we can do great things. And that's where the strategic planning comes in, is to say, what is it at GFW that we want to be amazing at? But in order to start that, we have to right the ship. We have to make these adjustments now, and our window is now. If we don't do it now, we're going to end up right back where we were.
So this shows you where our proposed fiscal year 20 SOD plan is and where we're projecting the unreserved fund balance to be. So in fiscal year 21, we're still in, at the end of this year, we're still in SOD at 2.52%. With those reductions built in fiscal year 22 and the levy dollars coming in, we're out of SOD with about 445,000 or 446,000 roughly. And then by the end of fiscal year 24, with our assumptions built in, we're at 13.1%, right where we want to be as far as fund balance goes. And that's about 1.1 million.
Yeah, I think right for our district, right around $1 million is probably where we should feel good and comfortable. And so obviously we have a ways to climb. We've swung the budget $1 million so far. We're going to keep working the budget to do everything we can with that, but we are thinking some reductions are necessary. But over time, you can see we're going to build back our health, and then we can talk about how we're utilizing and investing and maintaining, because now we don't necessarily need to be putting all that funding away at the same rate, because we've reestablished our fund balance.
So this is just a graph that kind of shows you the fiscal year 19 versus the fiscal year 20 proposed plan. And then it just gives you a nice graphic of where we were and where we're going.
So I think there's huge reasons to celebrate. If you look to the end of this current fiscal year, which is 2021, the difference is huge. And then by next year, we're rebuilding our fund balance, and by 23, you can see we're approaching $1 million there. That is really good news. We're in a much better place. But again, while there's a lot to celebrate and a lot of good work that's been done, we still have more work to do. And so there's celebrations, yes, but we got to keep working.
So with that being said, here are going to be our next steps. The school board will adopt the SOD plan. We need to submit it to MDE by January 31st per state statute. We will continue and work forward to the OBA process and also the strategic planning. And with all that combined, our goal is to right the ship.
So after we get the ship righted, after we make sure that everything is good, we will have the fund balance, we'll have the information from the community, from our parents, from our staff, to make those decisions on where we want to go next. But again, getting healthy is the first thing we need to do. And our fiscal health is really important. So we're not looking to save, we don't want to have the biggest fund balance, but we need to get enough where we can feel comfortable and ensure that we're sustainable, and let the community know that we're doing everything we can with what they've given us, and we're thankful for that, and we're going to make sure that that goes to good use. So there's great work again that has happened, but we still have a lot of good work to be done. In the meantime, while we're doing that, there's the strategic planning piece. Each of our sites are doing comprehensive needs assessments to identify those needs, as we talked about, those continuous improvement teams doing those comprehensive needs assessments. They'll be doing research on evidence-based practices. And so as we move towards the opportunity to invest and do some of those programming things, we're going to be prepared. We have time to train our staff. So when we actually do it, we do it well. And that's so much of what implementation science is all about. And that's what moving scores forward and having good academic programs is. It's the professional development that goes with it. It's giving the staff the training they need and access to the things they need to be successful. If we just jump into it, a lot of times we don't see the success rates that we could have had. With that, any comments or questions from the board? Well, yep. Thank you very much. If everybody's okay, then, yep, you get to read the whole resolution.
From the top section and all. We have to go through the board members that are all here. No. Okay. Resolution for recovery from statutory operating debt. Whereas school district 2365 has moved into statutory operating debt as of June 30th, 2020, as defined by Minnesota statute section 123B.81, subdivision 2. And whereas Minnesota statute section 123B.83, subdivision 4 requires a school district in SOD to submit to the Commissioner of Special Operating Plan to reduce deficit expenditures and to receive aid contingent on the school district's continued compliance with the plan. Whereas the school district 2365 has prepared a special operating plan, which has been presented, reviewed, understood by the school board. Now, therefore, it will be resolved that the Board of Education of District 2365 approves the attached special operating plan and accompanying SOD recovery spreadsheets and transmits the same to MDE. Agrees to reduce current year expenditures by all legal means possible without negatively impacting current programs or contractual obligations. Agrees to immediately discontinue the practice of approving deficit budgets. Creates an unreserved fund balance target of 5% or greater within 3 years after removal of SOD. Agrees to dollar for dollar cut in the current and future budgets to respond to a negatively variance in revenues and expenditures as displayed in the SOD plan. Agrees to use any aid formula improvement for or from the legislature to reduce debt. Agrees to remove the condition of SOD by the end of fiscal year 2024 and achieve a positive fund balance by 2025. Requests specialized training as appropriate. Agrees to submit preliminary budgets to MDE showing the discontinuance of deficit spending prior to their formal board approval. Each subsequent year until the removal of the negative fund balances. I make the motion. I make a motion to approve, how should I say it? The statutory operating debt proposal.
I'll make a second.
We have a second. Now we need to do roll call.
Yes.
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 Good there. Yep. Motion passed. We can adjourn the meeting. If I can have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Well, the motion has been made and we can adjourn the meeting.